Not all childhood abuse and childhood SA is experienced or is trauma. I'm Dr. Joe Kort. I'm the founder and director of the Center for Relationship Health in Royal Oak, Michigan. And today I'm going to be talking about clients that come through my office and the research that shows that not everybody who was abused as a child experiences trauma. This can be very unsettling and disconcerting to people who do experience trauma and who do remember the abuse as horrific and horrible, which it always is. Abuse is abuse and should never happen. However, over the years, and this happened to me many years ago as a psychotherapist, I had clients, well, they were gay male clients at the time, who said, we were talking about their childhood and they were reflecting back. They were in their 40s, 50s, and they were reflecting back with me that when they were young boys at age 10, they would have sleepovers with their best friends, and the father of the best friend would come in. So he would have been a man in his 40s, would come in and be sexual with him next to his friend who was sleeping. There were many, many kinds of episodes like that with many of my different clients in different variations. And of course, these aren't real clients I'm telling you about. These are composites. What happened for him was he would reflect about it in the office, telling me, I liked it. I wanted more. I remember it fondly. And I, as a psychotherapist trained in trauma, working with trauma, would say to them, well, what you're doing is reflecting wrongly about your trauma, about the abuse. It is trauma. All abuse is trauma. That's the research we had back then. We didn't know better. Today, we know that it is not always experienced as trauma. But either way, the client said to me, I do remember it fondly, and I'm not going to let you take this away from me. In other words, I will let you go as a therapist and find another therapist because this is my narrative. This is my truth, and I don't want it taken away from me. So we would go back and forth, and I finally, and this was client after client, by the way, and then I would have heterosexual clients say the same thing to me. Not all, this isn't many, many clients, but it's enough where I started to realize that I shouldn't push a narrative even if it's a true narrative. So let's say that the abuse did turn into trauma for them. As much as I want to point that out and will point that out as a therapist, if my client is saying, nope, this actually, some of them will say that was my first time. That was my first experience. And I would say trauma can't be your first experience. It could be your first experience with this kind of behavior, but it is an adult and it's non-consent because you were a child. And I'm very clear with them about that. And they'll say, I get that. And it was still special to me. And it informed the kinds of people that I'm drawn to today. So maybe the father was a hairy guy. Maybe he was a large guy. Maybe he was a small guy. Whatever he was, now that becomes the type of guy he's interested in. No matter what I say as a therapist, no matter what therapist he goes to, and I supervise many therapists, these type of clients will say, I'm not interested and you're not going to turn this into something negative for me. So let's talk about the research, which shows that not everybody who experiences abuse, and it is still abuse when an adult is with a child, let's not call it anything else. I'm not trying to make a case that it isn't, but it is not always trauma. Not everybody walks away with an experience that lingers for them and that causes them dysfunction. We see people who have car accidents, and you see the car and you think, oh my gosh, nobody could have survived that. Nobody could have lived through that. And the person gets out and wipes themselves off and says, wow, that was horrible, scary, but they're not in a situation that traumatized their body. Because let's remember, the medical terminology for trauma is when you have impact on your body, broken bones, broken skin, some intrusion in some way. That's a medical trauma. Mental health trauma is when you have an experience where you have abuse, and after that, you wouldn't be able to function very well. So you might be hyperactive in the bedroom. You might be dysfunctional in some way in the bedroom. It would manifest in intimacy disorders and things like that. And so what I have taught people and talked about in the therapy room is, how do we work with this? And if there are behaviors that look like trauma, I will point them out and say, I think this is. And sometimes trauma can be delayed, but I don't anticipate it as it's essential. I don't anticipate it like it's a requirement, because I now realize it isn't. Now, let's talk about how sometimes abuse, why it doesn't turn into trauma. For some people, because they're gay and they're gay children, this is an opportunity that they wouldn't have otherwise. They're suppressing it. They're avoiding it. They can't talk about being gay. People don't think of children as being gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and they are. Whether you like it or not, whether you want to believe it or not, many gay people, and I'm one of them, remember being very young. I remember being 3, 4, 5, and being attracted. It wasn't an adult sexual attraction, but it still was a draw and an attraction to somebody of the same sex. And so now for the person being abused, this is an outlet for them. And it doesn't cause issues for them. It causes them to feel good about themselves and solidify their orientation. Again, I'm not making a case for it. That's not what this video is about. I'm trying to understand it and explain the nuances. Also, when there's abuse, if somebody doesn't do anything about it and the child may tell an adult and say, this happened to me, or another adult sees that it happened and they do nothing, or they do something and they don't do it correctly or help in a helpful way, this can be the trauma. The trauma wasn't the abuse necessarily. It was what wasn't done, or wasn't done well, or wasn't done right. That's a really important nuance. However, if the abuse happens and it is done right, and the child does tell an adult, and the adult does something about it, and there's some corrective experience, and the perpetrators, dealt with in a way that maybe they have to experience their own consequences, then again, they wouldn't experience trauma because, yes, there was abuse, but the trauma is not there because there was resolution. There was a corrective experience watching this person. But then there's also people, and I've talked about this in many videos, that go from trauma reenactment to trauma play. Let's talk about that. Trauma reenactment is you are abused, it is traumatic, and so then you keep returning to the scene of the original crime as an adult with another adult, doing the same behavior compulsively, breaking relationship contracts, maybe doing things that aren't in your best interest with your medical health, your physical health, your legal situation. And so that's not good. That's why people end up coming to therapy, because they're putting themselves at risk. In therapy, when we do the healing around trauma that does exist because of the abuse, and we do the work whatever way we need to do. I'm a trauma specialist. I do EMDR. People go to group therapy. They go to other specialists on somatic therapy. There's IFS. There's so many different ways to treat that. The healing now might look like, for many people, trauma play. In other words, the trauma doesn't heal and then disappear. But what happened doesn't disappear. It still now becomes one of their turn-ons. It becomes part of them in some way. So they go from trauma reenactment to trauma play. And you'll see this in people's erotic lives, where they're engaging in behaviors that are exactly like what happened to them as a child in a consensual adult to adult position now as an adult doing this. But this time, they're working it through, they're playing with it, they're in control of it. And so they're playing with the trauma. It's trauma play. It's not trauma reenactment. Again, this can be really disconcerting to people who experience trauma and are unable to do this or unwilling to do this. It can cause shame for people. It can confuse people. And that's exactly the reason why I'm doing this video, so people can help feel more normal and not like something's wrong with them, and give them words to what happened. It will always be abuse. I don't care who sits across from me. When you tell me that you were 10 at one point, now you're in your adulthood, and somebody came in and they were an adult and engaged in some action with you that is always non-consent. You're the child, they're the adult, period. So that's not something I'm willing to negotiate on, but I am willing to hear that for some, it is not a trauma, and it doesn't linger, and it doesn't cause them to engage in behaviors that interfere with their lives. And that's not even why they're in therapy, by the way. So this is the other thing it's very crucial to know, is they didn't come in for this. It's part of their story that I ask when I do my intake, and several of the first sessions, we talk about all kinds of things. This is one of them, but that's not why they're in my office. If that looks like it's why they're in my office, of course we'll go down that road. But you can absolutely experience abuse and not have trauma. And that's an important distinction to make. You can look up the research yourself. It's well documented at this point. We just don't know who these people are until they come into the office and we talk about this. I'm Dr. Joe Kort. If you like this video and you want to hear more, please subscribe to this channel. I'm also on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram, and LinkedIn and Facebook. And you can find me at joekort.com. Thanks for listening.